Hi friends, we'll discuss about the ADO.NET. So as far as we have seen various features within the console application of C#, the next things that we're going to be discussing is how you can access the data. So to access the data and to operation on database, .NET is providing a facility which is called ActiveX Data Object, that is ADO, and in the .NET, so that is called ActiveX Database Object in .NET. So let's get started with the fundamentals of it. So this is the traditional architecture which was previously being used, where client was making a connection to the data system. They will pass the queries, they will pass the number of queries as they want, and at the end of all the transactions the data will get disconnected. So this is the traditional architecture where the connection has to be there during the all transactions, and the end of the all the transactions being performed, the connection get disconnected, right? Now this is the ADO.NET architecture, which is a very impressive architecture and the new fundamentals they have introduced, right? So they making a connection, then perform a query, and the transactions, after transaction data get disconnected. So that's why it is called disconnected architecture. So it's provide much more security, as connection will be only available when the data needs to be accessed, not all the time. In the previous connections, you can see the connection is established and available during the all transaction set. Here the connection will only be available for those transactions and it will get disconnected. That's why it is called disconnected data architecture. To implement such architecture and to use ADO.NET, various classes has been provided. So this is the architecture. We'll see one by one classes and everything. So we have a connection where you can establish your connection, your data connection strings, your database path, authentications, everything will be there. Then we have a command using which you can pass the queries, right? You can perform any of the operation, insert, update, delete, select, likewise. An adapter which is specifically used for disconnected mode, which can be having data set. And there is a UI level where you can use a WinForm, waveform, console application, anything. And to read the data, we also have a data reader class. So we'll be seeing that in a few minutes. So data set, if we can explore this data set, so data set is having the data tables, and data table will have the rows and columns, as well as you can pass the constraint like a primary key, foreign key, likewise. And you can manage the data relation using the data set as well. So this is a generalized architecture where we will be using the ADO.NET classes. So these are the main objects or the classes, you can say. First one is a connection, so which will be used for the connection. Command, which used for the queries or to pass the store procedures. Reader, which will read the data when the connection is open. So it's a connected architecture. For the data reader, we are using the connected architecture. And adapter, when the data needs to be connected to the system and the record can be fetched using the data set or data table. What are the components it is having? So data set, which is a local buffer, or you can say it's a mirror image of your database. So you can have as many tables as you want from your database to data set. A data table, so it contains the data in a tabular format, which is in a row and column. Then a data row, a data column, a relation, which is different relation between the tables, and constraint, which represents the various fields constraint which we have applied. A connection object is basically used to interact with the database. So you must have a connection to it in a connection object to responsible for set of connectivity within the database. So how the connection object is working? So it requires a connection string. A string which contains information of the connection, where the username is there, also a path, instances. So that detail will be stored into connection string. So what we do is we create a connection string and we pass that into a SQL connection class. So this is how it's gonna work: data source and your connection. Then we have a command object. So if you want to pass any query or a store procedure, we are using the command object, which executes your queries or store procedure using the standard C# statements. So how it's working? So your data source, connection would be there, and the command object. So where we'll be writing the query, but connection is necessary to execute your query. So we are using a query through a connection for the data source. So your query, then your command, and we are passing that connection to the command. Various methods for this command object is also there. That is execute none query. So if you are using insert, update or delete statement, this method will be used, which will return the number of rows affected in the data table. Basically, data execute reader. So when you are reading the data from the data table, the execute reader will be used, which will be reading the data. Scaler for specific column, if you require, if you want to read a specific column or first row in the result set, basically, for example, then you can use it with the scaler. And execute reader with the command behavior can also be used to read the multiple rows where the connection is available. So you can perform like any CRUD operation, insert, update, delete and select using the command object with the specific connection availability and the classes availability. A data reader is specifically used to read the data. So as you can see the architecture, data source and the connection, your command will execute a query, whether it is a select query, and the data reader will help to read those data. So it's a forward only and read only retrieval of your information. So it will read the data in a forward only manner. So it will be basically using the data and it will read the data. So your command will be there. We will pass the string, that is a select query, specifically your data reader, and we will use the method execute reader, so which will return the number of rows. Now we can check with the boolean method read that do we have a data based on our query or a string. So that will be a data reader dot read. So there are various methods available. You can read, it's a boolean method. You can use a close, so you can close the data reader. You can convert explicitly as well into get integer, get string or get value. You can get a next result as well, so it will give you the next result. So these are the methods which are most frequently used for the data reader object. Then we have a data adapters. So data adapters, sometimes the data you work with the primary read only and you really need to make changes to the underlying data source. So data adapter manages the data in a disconnected mode, right? Specifically, which we have seen, the data adapters fills the data set object when reading the data, writes into a data table into a data set. So basically how this is working is you can use a command and you can use a data adapter. So using command and connection, data adapter will fill your data source to a data set. So what sort of data tables you want to read? Let's say this data source is having 10 tables. In data set we want only 2 tables. So your data adapter will fetch all those data tables and it will get into the data set. How the syntax is specifically working? So you can have a string, your select query, a data adapter, your data set, and a da.fill. The fill is a method which will get you a data table based on your query. So whatsoever data in the login table, you will have it into a DS. And connection open and connection close is optional because it's a disconnected architecture. You can write it or you can avoid it. So that will be both the ways it will be working. So fill method basically will read the data from the data source and it will fill it into your data set. So these are the classes that we can use. In the next unit that we are discussing, the next session, we will going through all these connection classes and command classes and data reader classes. So you have a practical aspect of how this data ADO.NET classes are working. So specifically, we will be seeing in the console application, and later on the sessions we might also see into the WinForm or waveforms. So hope you have understood the ADO.NET. Thank you.